Hey guys, this is Dr. Hayes, and this is a video about Angela Carter and fairy tales that were written for older readers. That's what we're going to discuss in this video. So you had two stories that you had to read by Angela Carter from her collection, The Bloody Chamber, that I showed you in class, and we're two Beauty and the Beast retellings from this story. And so we're going to talk about those and talk about Angela Carter, but I want to expand beyond that and also talk about other fairy tale adaptations that were written for older readers in mind. I think on the syllabus I put adult fairy tales, but I'm going to include some that were written for teenagers as well, just because there's a difference between fairy tale adaptations that were written for young children, which I'm going to bring some to class and talk about picture books and little interactive books that were based on fairy tales and things that were updated for young children. But then I feel like there's a difference between that genre and then this sort of emergent trend where fairy tales were starting to be retold in novel length form for older readers. And so that's going to go along with and sort of lead us into our discussion in class of Robin McKinley next week. So those are the things that this video is going to cover. So let's talk about Angela Carter first, and then I have some samples I've pulled from my bookcases over here, and I'll show you a few things of older adult and teenage YA fairy tale retellings. So Angela Carter is British. She was born in England. I forget which town. It's not that important, but she was born in the early 1940, I think. It was right as World War II was at the very beginning. She was born, and so when things got bad, I know she was one of like the kids who was um, sort of taken out into the countryside and protected. It's If you're familiar with Chronicles of Narnia, that's sort of the basis of the plot of that story, is that the children were um, sort of ferried out of and sort of secreted out of the city and taken to the countryside to protect them from bombs. And so Angela Carter was one of those kids who she had family in Yorkshire, and so she lived for some years, during the war while she was a kid in the countryside in Yorkshire. That's kind of just an interesting thing from her past. And um, I know she was married twice. She died in the 1990s, like 1992, I think, is when she died. And she has written lots of things, poetry collections, story collections, novels. She's written quite a few things, but arguably the thing she's known for the most is this collection, The Bloody Chamber, is the thing that she's most recognized for. But she's written other things as well. It has, won awards, and she's a really well respected British author. So, but what we're talking about her for our purposes is The Bloody Chamber, because we're doing our whole unit on Beauty and the Beast, and she has two retellings of Beauty and the Beast in the story. So that's what we're going to focus on in our discussion of her. Just some things about her in general. Her re- sort of recurring themes in her writing in the Bloody Chamber and in other things that she's written, her poetry and whatnot. She's really interested in the roles of women, specifically stereotypical expectations of women in relationships, and how those can be sort of subverted and reclaimed, perhaps. Some of the rules about how a woman should conduct herself and expectations as far as that goes. And so her works are considered to be very feminist and progressive in that way. She um, really does sort of reimagine how women should be, right? What a woman should be, and that actually goes along with our discussion of Beauty and the Beast, because the original Madame de Beaumont Beauty and the Beast from the 1700s in France was also sort of her thesis on what a young woman should be, like what kind of a wife a young woman is expected to be and what kind of a marriage she's expected to have and what her responsibilities going into a marriage are. And so it's really interesting that Carter has taken that original tale of an allegory of arranged marriage, and she sort of modernized it in a couple different ways in the text, very different ways in the text. So I think I just want to go ahead and talk about this collection. I don't think you need to know very much more about Carter, about her personal life or anything, but so The Bloody Chamber came out in 1979. It was sort of revolutionary for the time. If you think about, culturally what was happening in the 1970s, um, you had sort of the civil rights movement in the 50s and 60s that sort of also ushered in other human rights considerations like the feminist movement and just sort of this increased focus on human rights in general. And so she was definitely a part of that feminist idea that was, that this, not necessarily the political feminist, but more of the ideological, artistic expressions of feminism, of sort of questioning the canon of literature and questioning stereotypical depictions of women characters in literature and sort of reclaiming some of that space and challenging the stereotypes that have come before. That's the kind of feminism I'm talking about. Literary, artistic feminism rather than the sort of political activist feminism that you might have been thinking when I said that. It's a couple different uses of that term. And so in this collection, it's very much intended for an adult audience. Like she wasn't trying to make fairy tales cool for teens or kids or anything like that. But if you recall, we've talked about in class, in the 1970s was also when children's literature scholarship really got started on an academic level. And so the advent of children's literature as a scholarly field, I think, paved the way for things like collections like The Bloody Chamber and for authors like Angela Carter to sort of have a space, to have an opportunity to experiment in this way. So even though her collection is not written for children, it is still sort of, it fits in with the cycle that we're discussing as far as um, if you recall, we discussed in class, fairy tales and folk tales were originally not intended for children. They were oral tales that people would tell. It was all people would listen to them, and it was some of them had some pretty gruesome things, and they were meant to sort of impart wisdom and morals to people, of a culture, and young people would hear the tales and be told the tales. But it wasn't until the, say, 1800s when fairy tale collections started to be commodified and sold and were sort of relegated to the nursery. They were considered to be kiddie stuff. That was very much a product of the post-romantic child golden age sort of era of children's literature, where fairy tales were sort of scrubbed down and made appropriate for children, and then repackaged and published in collections for nannies and governesses and even parents, to read to their children and for children to read. And so then it wasn't until much later into the 20th century that we talked about when scholarship started to come out. Tolkien helped contributed this trend, Tolkien and Lewis, and then later when children's literature scholarship began is when um, fairy tales and folk tales began to be reclaimed for adult readers and taken seriously as literature and art rather than just kiddie stories. And so Angela Carter fits right in with that cycle. And so this collection, The Bloody Chamber is what it's called because the longest tale in here is called The Bloody Chamber. and it is more like a novella. It's, you know, it's definitely the longest one. I'm trying to see how many pages. 42, 3, 45 pages is, so if you're looking at the book, this whole first part is just the one tale, the Bloody Chamber, and it's a retelling of the Bluebeard tale, the Legend of Bluebeard. It's very good if you're interested in reading something like that. Um, but it was originally written for this collection, and then one of the stories you read, The Tiger's Bride, an original story for this collection. Everything else in the collection, all the other stories, were previously published in other places. The handout that I put in Canvas that I had you read for this class has a list of all of the tales in the collection and where they originally were published before they were published in this tale. So the two stories you had to read occur back to back in the collection. The first story in the collection is The Bloody Chamber. Then you have two retellings of Beauty and the Beast back to back. The Courtship of Mr. Lion is the first one. It was originally published in Vogue and was sort of rehashed. It was edited and revised for this collection. And then right after that is The Tiger's Bride, which is an original for this collection. So I think I've always been sort of a mind that the two stories of Beauty and the Beast in this collection are placed strategically in the order that they are. I think The Courtship of Mr. Lion is intended to come first, and we are meant to read it and then immediately go into its counterpart, The Tiger's Bride. To be retellings of Beauty and the Beast, these stories could not be any more different. I'm sure you picked up on that. Like, they're completely different tonally. The setting is different. The plots, take drastically different turns. So I think that is intentional on Carter's part. I think the placement in the collection is intentional. That we're supposed to read The Courtship of Mr. Lion first, and then sort of as the other side of the coin, as the counterpoint, we read The Tiger's Bride as a now for something completely different. Let me show you Exhibit B, right? And so it's kind of, The Tiger's Bride is a little, it's kind of jarring and unexpected when read on the heels of The Courtship of Mr. Lion. So I think that she was being strategic when she did that. So I thought I could maybe just point out a couple things from each one, and just make sure you don't miss these certain elements in each one. So I keep looking down because I have my book in my lap. So The Courtship of Mr. Lion is pretty much a straightforward, almost one-to-one retelling of the de Beaumont Beauty and the Beast story, except it's set in present day, whenever, 1970s London. And so the things we can kind of tell at the beginning, there's a telephone, there is a automobile, there's a man whose car breaks down, right, and he goes into this mansion, and there's a phone there. So there are these indicators that we're in present day, we're in modern times, right? This isn't a period piece set back in the 1700s when Beauty and the Beast was originally, when de Beaumont's Beauty and the Beast was published, the 1756. But this one is, it is modern times. So we talked about in our discussion of the ATU index, where the ATU 425C, which is what we're dealing with here, this Beauty and the Beast tale, there are some key components that need to be there in order for this to classify as a 425C category, Animal Bridegroom, Beauty and the Beast tale. And so we have a father who gets stranded. He has a daughter. We're not given the fact that she was like the youngest or the prettiest or anything like that. But there's a father who's out in the snow, and he gets stranded at a mysterious transformed man's mansion, and he steals a rose. Like, he takes a rose that he's not supposed to take, and he makes a contract for his daughter to come live there. in exchange to pay penance, which that is one part of the story that completely breaks down when you retell this story in modern times, whereas the father would say, "Oh, you're mad at me, and because I took your rose, take my daughter," right? Like that's one of the, you know, when this was the tale was originally written in an era when fathers were giving away their daughters and selling off their daughters to whomever would, would make the best connection or who would pay the most for them. Having a father be in charge of who his daughter goes and lives with used to be not that big of an idea, right? It wasn't that big of a deal to think of. But in a setting in the 1970s, for a father to say, I've sold you to somebody, to his daughter, that doesn't really hold up. So it's kind of interesting. This is a little bit of that magical realism where the dude's a lion, he has a mansion, he wants you to go live with him, just go with it, right? But their family has a lot of debt, so that's kind of how it's explained, and that's similar to de Beaumont's tale, where the family's ruined, the father's destitute, and so the beast offers to take care of the family and pay off their debt and everything. So that part, I mean, you can kind of, she would do it for like the money, the bribe. But one of the elements is she goes willingly, and so that holds up in this story is that she goes and lives with him willingly, and she has to break a rule. And so I want to talk about that in this story, what her transgression is. Talked about in Beauty and the Beast tales and the Animal Bridegroom tales, the bride always has sort of a rule she's breaking or a transgression that she commits. And so I definitely want to talk about that in here. And then she has to return and break the spell. And she basically just has to agree to marry him and has to agree that he's the one for her. Sometimes in some of these versions, it is, I love you. It's like love. Sometimes it's just, I don't hate you and I agree to marry you of my own free will. Sometimes it is, I have grown attached to you and I have affection for you, and I'm not feeling like I'm your captive anymore, but I actually want to be here. Then at any rate, Beauty has to go back and make amends for the transgression. Usually it's because she's left and has stayed gone too long, and she has to go back and find him and make it better. And so in this retelling, The Courtship of Mr. Lion, which I don't know if you noticed, the cover of the book is, it's the door knocker, the lion. I think that's interesting. So the only fairy tale elements in this story, it's set in modern times. Beauty is a modern woman. It's just the guy that Mr. Lion is a literal like lion faced guy, right? But other than that, like everything kind of is not super magical. He has a room ready for her, just like in the classic versions with Beauty's room, and it's all set up with everything that she likes. And so there's lots of recognizable elements in the story. And so some people are like, well, this is kind of boring. It's just the same. I'm literally reading the same story from de Beaumont. It's just there's a car and there's, a telephone, and it's set in modern times. But I wanted to point out sort of the main difference, and the thing that I think Carter had to sort of change the element of the transgression when Beauty, the rule Beauty breaks had to be a little bit more severe to make this tale hold up to a modern reading. Sorry, I said my. But anyway, she leaves. She wants to go check on her dad, but then she stays gone for a long time, and it talks about how the seasons change, and that's not that different from the tale. She stays gone longer than what she's supposed to, but this, like, she stays gone a long, long time. But instead of being just gone super long, Beauty kind of gets into this extravagant nightlife with her father that the Mr. Lyon's money was paid for. That they're in good financial situation now because of Mr. Lyon's money helping them, and now she's living on the high life. Um, she talks about how they go to the opera. They go to she wears furs and she wears pearls, and um, she has a lot of fine things in her room, and they go to the theater. And so there's this moment where let's see, it's on page 57 if you are looking at the if you want to look at the thing. There is a moment where it says, returning late, I'm just going to read a part. Returning late from supper after the theater, she took off her earrings in front of the mirror. Beauty. She smiled at herself with satisfaction. She was learning at the end of her adolescence how to be a spoiled child, and that pearly skin of hers was plumping out, a little, with high living and compliments. A certain inwardness was beginning to transform the lines around her mouth, those signatures of the personality, and her sweetness and her gravity could sometimes turn a mite petulant when things went not quite as she wanted them to go. You could not have said that her freshness was fading, but she smiled at herself in mirrors a little too often these days, and the face that smiled back was not quite the one she had seen contained in the beast's agate eyes. Her face was acquiring, instead of beauty, a lacquer. That's not really a positive word, a lacquer of the invincible prettiness that characterizes certain pampered, exquisite, expensive cats. So we have this description of Beauty who has um, blossomed. She has blossomed. It says she's at the end of her adolescence. She is recognizing her assets, if you will. She's like, I am beautiful, right? She sees herself in the mirror quite often. She gets a little bit preoccupied with her appearance and beautification, and it talks about how she can act petulant when she doesn't get her way, like like pouty when she doesn't get her way. And so this is not the Beauty character that we're used to in Beauty and the Beast. De Beaumont's Beauty, Disney's Belle, like different versions of Beauty, East of the Sun, West of the Moon. The Beauty character. Beauty is usually infallibly gracious and kind and humble and things like that. This sort of vain, petulant, spoiled Beauty is not the Beauty that we're used to, right? And so she's sort of admiring herself, and she hears a urgent scrabbling sound as of claws at her door. So this is the moment. Her trance before the mirror broke. All at once, she remembered everything perfectly. Spring was here, and she had broken her promise. Now the beast himself had come in pursuit of her. First she was frightened of his anger, then mysteriously joyful. She ran to open the door, but it was his liver and white-spotted spaniel, his dog, who hurled herself into the girl's arms in a flurry of little barks and gruff murmurings of whimpering and relief. And so she notices that the dog is all like ratty looking and not groomed and is looking all bad. And so she realizes, oh no, something must be wrong. And so she follows the dog back. She had been gone 3 months, and that was much longer than what she had promised to be gone. And so she gets, just like in De Beaumont's Beauty and the Beast, she gets to the mansion and she finds it run down and sort of abandoned and cold, and she kind of has to search through, and she finds the beast on the verge of death, and instead of some sort of magical purpose, or for his like being on the verge of death, it seems that he's just starved himself, like he stopped eating, and so he is basically gone into a depression and is just in his room and doesn't do anything and just doesn't get out of bed. He's on the verge of death, and so the dog came to find her. That is sort of a magical element, that the dog could come find her, because she had to take a train there. And so and he doesn't just immediately like, I'm better. It's not like on Disney where he flies up in the air and is covered with sparks. Um, she has to. He perks up when he sees her, but she has to sort of apologize and tell him she's there for good now. And then she like nurses him back to health with soup and things, and gets him to eat. And then at the last one, the last line, Mr. and Mrs. Lion walk in the garden. The old spaniel drowses on the grass in a drift of fallen petals. So the last sentence tells us that they do get married and live happily ever after, basically. So the main difference with this tale, other than modernizing all the elements from de Beaumont's tale, the main difference is Beauty's transgression. It's a much more severe um, sort of penance that she has to pay, a much more severe character flaw. And that's one of the things that, we'll talk about Beauty and the Beast. One of the things I've always noticed about this, even in the Disney version, the Beauty and the Beast has always been sort of the Beast's story, right? It's his story. He's the one who has a lesson to learn. He's the one who um, has to be transformed. He's the one who sort of has to be tamed, I guess you will. And for the most part, in most of these stories, Beauty is, she doesn't really grow or change throughout the story. She makes a minor error. I mean, her main change is that she's not ready to grow up. Like, she wants to stay in her house with her father, and that's inappropriate. So she must accept her life as an adult. And so her main transgression is that she's too still connected to her father's home and not willing enough to come and be a married woman. And so she has to kind of accept that about herself. This version, the Courtship of Mr. Lion, is much more of a, she has gotten full of herself, right? She has gotten these other like negative virtues like vanity and sort of pettiness and this spoiledness, that's not a term, being spoiled. And so she has to sort of be snapped, and she's snapped out of it kind of like a magic spell as soon as she hears the dog scrabbling at the door. But overall, so that's sort of this message where I guess, Carter is sort of reclaiming the story as Beauty's journey, Beauty's story, rather than being mostly about the Beast. And something else about this story too is, let's see. Yeah, so at the very end, he changes from a lion into a man. But it doesn't say, like, there's no reason why. It's just, he changes into a man at the end. So that's something we will talk about too in class, is the transformation and how it doesn't seem to be explained very much in some of these stories. I was trying to see if there's anything else on this last page to say about the Courtship of Mr. Lion, but I want to compare it, or contrast it is more likely, with Tiger's Bride. So the next story in the collection is The Tiger's Bride. This is also an animal bridegroom story, 425C. It's set though in Russia, or at least that's where they were coming from. They were coming from Russia and got to Milan, or coming from Milan and got to Russia. I never remember. But it is set more in the period. It's not modern. It's set more in the period of when Beauty and the Beast would have been set. Sort of a pre-electric era. And so this, you have to work a little bit harder to find all of the Beauty and the Beast elements in this one. I mean, the character's name, the man's name is the Beast, and there's a woman or father who, it says we left Russia. That's right. I just happened to see that. And then they come to Milan. So it is set. Yeah. Sorry, that's not. I'm just reading. I'm just reading the thing. So it's this one girl who travels with her father, and he is a gambler. He's addicted to gambling, and so just like in the Beauty and the Beast tales, he's lost his money, his fortune has turned, he's destitute, he needs money, right? His deals have fallen through. And so he has to make a contract with the beast to sell off his daughter, and in this case, it's a hand of cards, right? So he loses his daughter to this beast in a hand of cards. And so one of the elements is she has to go willingly, which she does because in this version she's kind of pissed at her dad because he bet her in cards, and so he lost her in a hand of cards. She was like, "I'm screw you, I'll go with him." So she wasn't really. It seems like she didn't have a choice, but the way that Carter sort of keeps it intact is that she wants to go because she's mad at her dad for betting her with cards. And so she does go willingly, even though it seems like she doesn't have a choice in the narrative of the story. Um, we have the Beast is very creepy. So just for the sake of time, I mean, he's basically a tiger who is in a human costume, trying to walk upright. Right? He is he has like a jacket that has gloves stuck in the armholes. He's got pants and he walks kind of awkward and crooked. He's got a mask that it's like a man-faced mask, kind of creepy. I don't know. I picture something kind of like the Phantom of the Opera or something like Michael Myers, even just like a weird mask. And then he has a wig of hair that's a ponytail, like a French aristocrat would have, like a ponytail. And so he's just very off-putting. Um, and everyone's like, there's something about him. And he has this sort of assistant that speaks for him, right? Because he doesn't talk. And so there's this whole, just weirdness about the Beast. There's still the element of there's a nod to the rose. Um, that he has let's see, he has a white rose, unnatural, out of season, that now my nervous fingers ripped petal by petal apart as my father magnificently concluded the career he had made of catastrophe. So there's the element of the rose that is included in here. Because the Beast gave her the rose. So that's a switch. The Beast gives her a rose out of his buttonhole for her to hold while they're playing cards. And so that's sort of a flip from how the father takes the rose, which we talked about in class with Beauty and Beast as they represents him, her, picking her flower, right? Picking a flower, and that's the Beast is supposed to be able to pick her flower, not the father, and that's why that's bad. So this kind of takes that back where the Beast gives her the flower instead of the father taking it. Um, so anyway, she goes, long story short, she goes and lives with this weird tiger man. Lots of weird stuff goes on. In the original Beauty and the Beast, he asks her to marry him every night, and she says no. In this Beauty and the Beast, he asks her to get naked all the time, right? He's asking her to reveal herself to him. He's asking her to take her clothes off, and she's creeped out. She's like, no, I don't want to, right? So that's the request he keeps making, is for her to show her show her naked self. And it seems, to me, it seems completely creepy until the end of the story. Full disclosure, I love this story. I love The Tiger's Bride. I think it is so sensual and just meaningful. So the end makes it all for me. When he's asking her to get naked, she even does, she lays and pulls her skirt up, and she takes her top down or whatever at a certain point. He's like, no, I mean really naked, like the real you. And you're like, what is this guy's deal? Because that's not what he was wanting, right? That's not what he was wanting. There's a whole thing with he has an automaton, which is like a mechanized robot kind of a thing that looks like her. It's like an uncanny um, version, like a double of her. And he has this automaton of her that kind of creeps her out. And so there's all this weird stuff that's happening. But to me, it all comes together in the end. And so this whole time she's afraid he's going to eat her up. He's going to gobble her up. That she is in danger from him, that his wildness and his requests are just too much, and he has bad intentions for her, which goes along with the Beauty and the Beast, narrative of being afraid of your husband until you accept that he is, has your best intentions, and then you can love him. So it fits all in with all of that, with some of this interesting sort of um, fantastical goth elements in there, with the automaton and the fact that it's a tiger instead of a lion is a little bit more exotic, and the assistant who's really cryptic, right? And let's see, I'm wanting to skip because there's all these sort of interactions that they have. Um, that they go hunting, they sort of meet up in his quarters. Um, let's see, yeah, sorry, I'm just getting to the end for the sake of time. So anyway, she sees in the mirror, she gets the glimpse just like Beauty normally does. She gets a glimpse in a magic mirror that her father um, is not okay. Right, that's the classic. She's worried about her father. She sees he's destitute. He's not okay. He's not doing well, and she's worried about him. Here's where the story changes. Okay, so normally the Beauty character commits a transgression by leaving the beast behind and going back to her father. Which once a woman leaves her house and her father and gets married, she's not supposed to want to go back. So she leaves and goes back, and she stays too long, and the beast is all distraught. That is not what happens in the story. This is where this story completely is reclaimed, if you will, by Carter. So uh, she basically makes a decision. Beauty makes a decision that I'm going to be all in, to use a poker term for the story. And so she sends somehow she feels this connection to the beast. Like she knows that that's where she's supposed to be. She understands that he is, she is his, and that that's where she belongs. And so she sends the automaton fake version of her back to her father. So this sort of um, dead copy, and her father doesn't know the difference. She watches in the mirror, and the father doesn't. He's overjoyed, and so it's sort of this lesson that you that version of herself from before, when she was young and sort of naive, inexperienced with the world, that version of her was empty. It was incomplete. And so the only version of herself that could go backwards and still thrive is an empty copy of herself, right? So she sends this empty copy of herself back to appease her father. And then so she then is fully committed and ready to move forward with whatever might happen with the beast. And so the valet brings her a gift, and it's earrings that were like tears, like the tiger's tears were turned into earrings. And so she puts those on. Um, and she makes a comment how they were very heavy. I'm pretty sure that's symbolic because it was his emotion and sort of claiming of her in those earrings. I'm trying to, get to the last part. So the ending is so powerful to me, and kind of adult. This is the adult part of the story. So she goes to see the beast, right? He has beckoned her, and so the valet takes off his livery, his clothing, and he is a creature. He has covered with silken moth gray fur, brown fingers supple as leather, chocolate muzzle, the gentlest creature in the world. He gibbered a little to see my fine furs and jewels as if I were dressed up for the opera, and with a great deal of tender ceremony removed the furs from her shoulders. The sables thereupon resolved themselves into a pack of black squeaking rats, that rattled immediately down the stairs on their hard little feet and were lost to sight. So she shows up for this meeting with the Beast wearing like fur cloak and dressed like she's fancy, but the valet has stopped wearing his person clothes, and he's like a creature, like a furred creature, and he takes her fur coat off, and it turns into rats and scares her away. So it was like, no, no, that doesn't belong on you. That is not what we're here. That's not what we're about. So she says the valet um, shows her into the Beast room. So all the stuff that the Beast normally wears, his mask, the outfit he wears, the gloves, the wig, they were all laid out sort of in the shape of him. And uh, let's see, there was a reek of fur and piss. So it's very animalistic in there, a reek of fur and piss. The incense pot lay broken in pieces on the floor. Half-burned sticks were scattered from the extinguished fire. So anyway, he is he has abandoned his human disguise. He has gone full animal, right? He's full beast, and he's a tiger. It says he was pacing backwards and forwards, the tip of his heavy tail twitching as he paced out length and breadth of his imprisonment between the gnawed and bloody bones. So there's bone like a tiger's cage in there. It's like a room in a castle, but because he is now in his animal form, it's like he's in a cage. He's imprisoned. He's knocked over the incense. He's taken off his human disguise. He's surrounded by bloody bones of what he had been eating. It smells like piss and fur in there. So he has gone full like feral, right? Full animal in there. And if you're not catching up, this is a metaphor, right, for sort of um, this sort of virile masculinity, this animalistic nature that he's fully embraced. Um, so at first she thinks he's going to devour her and gobble her up because that's the only thing she knows about what a man would do to a woman, and it's a negative thing. But now she is in a new mindset, and she's willing to accept that it could be a positive interaction. Um, and then she says, he was far more frightened of me than I was of him. She notices his fear. So says she goes, I squatted on the wet straw and stretched out my hand. I was now within the field of force of his golden eyes. He growled at the back of his throat, lowered his head, sank onto his forepaws, snarled, showed me his red gullet, like down his mouth, his yellow teeth. I never moved. He snuffed the air as if to smell my fear. He could not. So he is prostrating himself to her. So here um, she comes to his chambers, and expecting to be gobbled up, but like willing to accept that if that's her fate, right? Because she just knows that she's supposed to go to be with him. And but what he does, she kneels down and he lays down in front of her. So he has kind of a growl in the back of his throat, but he lowers his head and sinks down onto his forepaws and like shows his throat, which is like a sign of submission, right? An animal sign of submission. So he's submitting to her, and he kind of tastes the air to see if she's afraid, and he see if she could smell her fear, and she says he could not, meaning I wasn't afraid, right? I was confident I belonged here. Um, slowly, slowly, he began to drag his heavy, gleaming weight across the floor towards me. A tremendous throbbing, as of the engine that makes the earth turn, filled the little room. He had begun to purr. So when she kneels down in front of him, he prostrates himself in front of her, reveals his throat. She's not afraid. He comes crawling towards her. He starts purring. Um, the sweet thunder of his purr shook the old walls, made the shutters batter the windows until they burst apart and let in the white light of the snowy moon. Tiles came crashing down from the roof. I heard them fall into the courtyard far below. The reverberations of his purring rocked the foundations of the house. The walls began to dance. I thought, it will all fall. Everything will disintegrate. What's happening is this sort of animalistic purring of his is vibrating the human, um, civilized trappings that are surrounding him. The tiles on the walls, the shutters on the windows are blowing off. So sort of this civilized human living space is being torn apart by the vibrations of his animalistic purr. Um, and then she says, he dragged himself closer and closer to me until I felt the harsh velvet of his head against my hand. Then a tongue, abrasive as sandpaper. She says, he will lick the skin off me. So if you think of a cat's tongue, they have those barbs on them that are real rough. So a cat is just like sandpaper. But a lion, or a tiger, both actually, a tiger, the way that they eat food is they don't necessarily bite it, they lick, and the barbs on their tongue like rips the flesh, right? And so she's like, he will lick the skin off me. And then the last paragraph, and each stroke of his tongue ripped off skin after successive skin, all the skins of a life in the world, and left behind a nascent patina of shining hairs. So she has fur underneath her skin. So he's licking off her human skin and revealing a furred creature like him underneath, her true form. So all along, it makes sense how he kept asking her to become naked, bare herself to him. And when she would, that's not what he wanted. This is what he wanted. He knew her true nature. He was her true beloved because he could see through her outward disguise. He could see through to the inner self that she was hiding, and he knew that he could get to it. He knew it was underneath when even she didn't know, right? So he licked off all of her skin and revealed that she was a creature with hair, fur underneath. My earrings turned back to water and trickled down my shoulders. I shrugged the drops off of my beautiful fur. So this is a wedding night. Like, I don't know if you picked up on that, but the whole like kneeling in front of each other, crawling toward each other, purring, like this is foreplay, right? Like this is a man and wife who are coming together in that way for the first time. That's what's happening here. This is a wedding night. They're consummating their union. They are joining for the first time. And so this is one of those things. She is describing and revealing a woman who has become sexually awakened for the first time. She discovers an animalistic part of herself with her husband on her wedding night that she did not know existed before that. And this, I mean, if you're skeeved out by the fact that it's a wedding night, maybe don't think of it as a wedding. Maybe think of it just the first time that that a person comes together with their beloved, like their soulmate or whatever. So she's describing a first time, a first night spent together, and it's this sort of real experience. It's a real experience to where there were no secrets, no walls between them, no sort of trappings of civilization. It was all sort of this instinctual, animalistic, and sort of their true natures were being revealed. They didn't have to hide anything. She didn't have to hide anything from him. He didn't have to hide anything from her. And so Carter is depicting something that's actually pretty beautiful, right? And this is what I was talking about with this sort of reclaiming of these narratives, where Beauty did not make any mistakes. Like, she did not transgress. She did everything she was supposed to do. She went in fully, consensually, excitedly into this union. And so it's kind of a twist. So instead of the beast transforming into a human at the end, she transformed into her true nature, which was an animal, at the end. So it's kind of like the Swan Maiden stories I talked to you about, a la Fiona from Shrek, right, who changes into an ogre, her true form, when she meets her true love. So this has a little bit of that sort of inspiration there, where it's a little bit of a twist that the beauty's true form is an animal with fur rather than the tiger's true form. Um, yeah, but they were both hiding throughout the story. They were both sort of covering up who they are, and sort of this sort of beautiful moment in the end when they neither one of them feel like they have to hide from each other anymore, and um, their union is perfect, basically. Um, Sorry to get all romantic on you, but that's one of the reasons why this collection is definitely geared toward an adult, older audience, because this, it's sort of mature, not explicit, but mature in sort of the eroticism of that final scene of the story. I just absolutely love that story. I think it is perfectly toned. I think there's some of the weirder elements in the middle could be shortened or edited down a little bit. I think some of the weirder elements distract and sort of um, drag on the story a little bit. I think it could have been tighter as far as that goes, but as far conceptually and tonally and the way it ends, I just love this. I think it was a major success. A lot of my students, I think it was weird. They didn't really get it. They don't understand it. So if that was you, that's perfectly fine. But I wanted to sort of make this video to go along with your reading for the week so that you would sort of see it the way maybe I think the way Carter meant for it to be read, and so maybe that might change your perspective a little bit. So I know this video is getting a little bit long already, but I wanted just to kind of show you some examples of other sort of people who have come after Angela Carter. She kind of was one of the first of her kind of sort of making these adult retellings of these classic tales, these fairy tales. And so there's a few others. Let's see. The author Alex Flynn. I don't know if you've read her or seen her movie. She wrote Beastly, which they made a movie about. This is the cover of the movie. But it's like a high school modern age retelling of Beauty and the Beast. And it's very much inspired by the Disney one because he's a jerk in school and has to learn a lesson. So he's cursed by a witch to make him more humble. But she is hired to come be his tutor because he can't go out in public anymore. And he tends roses, and so like it's very, very much like there's a lot of cool Beauty and the Beast elements in there. So Alex Flynn, but she has several. So these are all set in modern times. Towering is a Rapunzel retelling, and it's sort of a baby who was stolen from a hospital and who was missing. I think stolen from a hospital. Anyway, she was stolen from when she was little, and kept in these sort of ruins by this woman. And but it's definitely set in modern times. It's not, like she's a famous missing person. This girl is. It's not like back in a period. Mirrored is Snow White. It's a Snow White retelling, and A Kiss in Time is a really cool book. So A Kiss in Time is a Sleeping Beauty retelling. But so in the classic versions of Sleeping Beauty, she is under the spell for 100 years. And so in this one, a kid, there's a couple of high school guys who are on a trip in Europe, and they're trying to get to the beach, but they take a wrong turn, and they have to break their way through this thicket, which is like Sleeping Beauty, and they find this castle, and they think it's like an amusement park or something, but it's all like abandoned. And they find this girl, and something comes over him, and he kisses her, and so she comes to life, and the whole castle and everybody comes to life. But they've been under the spell for 100 years or something, and so the castle appears out of nowhere on the map. This whole city, this whole little town around the castle appears out of nowhere on the map, and everybody wakes up, and it's been 100 years. So it's kind of interesting, it brings it into modern times. So yeah, Alex Flynn is a really cool sort of modern. Her books are YA, but I mean they're definitely for teenagers, high school age books. So they're meant for older readers. So if you like that kind of thing, Alex Flynn, I definitely recommend her. Another one is Donna Jo Napoli. We're not reading any of her books, but she writes really cool fairy tale reimaginings for you could argue that they're for adults, but I mean, they're perfectly fine for like a teenager to read. You'd have to be at least a teenager to comprehend, I think, some of the vocabulary and the concepts in them. But they're not like mature, they're just meant for older readers. But this one is a Beauty and the Beast, and it's a Persian prince. And I'm trying to see, there's a good sentence on the back that like describes it. So he's cursed by a fairy. He's punished. He turns into a beast, a curse to be undone only by the love of a woman. And so he goes. It's all set in the Middle East and France. And the beast has to sort of learn a lesson. And very Disney version. The beast has to learn a lesson. She also has one, The Magic Circle. I really like this book. It's about it's the backstory of the witch in Hansel and Gretel, who makes the candy house, the gingerbread house. It's all about her story and how she ended up out there and doing what she's doing. That's what this one's about, The Magic Circle. This is a Rapunzel retelling called Zell. Get it? Rapunzel, Zell. And I don't think she lives in a tower. She just lives in the, like, secluded in the mountains. Yeah, but it's pretty much a straightforward Rapunzel retelling. And then this one is really cool. It's called Bound, and it is a Cinderella story, but it's set in China, and it's a girl and her two sisters, and the reason that they're better than her, like they usually are in the Cinderella stories, is because their feet are bound. In China, the aristocratic women would do foot binding and make from birth and make their feet really teeny tiny. And her feet, she was like the sort of stepsister. She was like their servant, so her feet are regular size. They're unbound, and so that's the whole thing about the shoe fitting. In here is that because of the foot binding, um, there's a shoe that only fits her because her feet aren't bound. So it's an interesting twist on the Cinderella story. Um, I also have this collection. I'm not going to go too much into these, but I found this whole collection of it's a Once Upon a Time series, and they're just kind of real interesting, sort of reimaginings of fairy tales. Snow, that's the Snow White one. Before Midnight is the Cinderella one. They kind of have like a romance novel-y sort of look. Golden is the Rapunzel one. Beauty Sleep, you can kind of guess which that one is. And then the one that's reading these is Belle. And it says, Belle is convinced she has the wrong name as she lacks her sister's awe-inspiring beauty. So she withdraws from society, devoting her time to wood carving. That's new. Secretly, Belle longs to find the fabled heartwood tree. If carved by the right hands, the heartwood will reveal the face of one's true love. During a fierce storm, Belle's father stumbles upon the mysterious heartwood and encounters a terrifying and lonely beast. Now Belle must carve the heartwood to save her father and learn to see not with the eyes of her mind, but with the eyes of her heart. So she's a wood carver in this one, which is kind of an interesting twist. But yeah, I found those recently, and so I was like, oh, these are neat. I'll get these to add to my collection. Also, this one is a really cool fairy tale retelling for older readers. It's called Ash, which you can maybe guess what ash is a retelling of. Another word for ashes are cinders, if you will. And so this is a Cinderella story, but it's a lesbian Cinderella story. And so Ash, instead of ending up with the prince, she ends up going off with a huntress who's the leader of the royal hunt, who they go out and hunt for game for the castle. The leader of the royal hunt is a woman, a huntress, and they end up going off together. And there's a whole thing with fairies and stuff in here. So it's kind of an interesting, cool same-sex retelling of Cinderella. On that note, I have another same-sex retelling of a fairy tale, The Sleeper and the Spindle. So you can kind of guess that's a Sleeping Beauty retelling, but it is a story by Neil Gaiman, which if you're familiar with, if you know, you know. Neil Gaiman is awesome. But this is a really cool edition. You kind of see the Sleeping Beauty character on the back, but it's a slipcase. I'm going to show you a couple pages. I really like the font. It's got a really cool font, and so instead of, but basically it's this kind of, trying to find some good. So the hero, I guess you could say, is this woman who is like a fighter. She's a warrior. She's got armor on, and she she comes upon this castle where everyone is sort of under a spell and asleep, and she discovers the princess asleep in the bed. Um, there's this sort of really well known. Yeah, this is the sort of famous drawing from the book where it's the true love's kiss, and she wakes up the sleeping princess after. I mean, there's all these scenes where she's fighting off all these like weird goblins and things. She's fighting them off with her, and so it's real actiony. Lots of action and gross monsters and things. And then she wakes up the princess and sort of breaks the spell. Trying to see if there's another kind of image. But anyway, if you like this kind of thing, it's really interesting. I like this sort of cool. It's like gold. It's hard to see. Anyway, okay, so that's the Sleeper and the Spindle. There's just a couple more that I wanted to show you. Another fairy tale reteller is Jane Yolen. I really like Jane Yolen. I have a few of her books. Curse of the 13th Fae is a Sleeping Beauty retelling. Snow in Summer is a Snow White retelling. And one of them that my favorite Jane Yolen is Briar Rose. This is definitely for adults. Like I think probably these might be geared toward teens, but this one is definitely geared more toward adults, and it's set, I think, like in the 80s, the 1980s, but it flips back and forth between the 1980s and then the Holocaust. So the Briar Rose is Sleeping Beauty's name in sort of some of the classic versions, like the Perrault version and stuff. Her name's Briar Rose, and so in this version, it's set during the Holocaust, and Briar Rose is a Jew, and she's captured and taken to a concentration camp. And one of her best friends that she makes there is this Italian guy. He's a homosexual, so which is why he was in the concentration camps, because they were round up as well. And so his name is something 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 La Prince or whatever. Like, so his last name is Prince, and that's kind of, he's the prince. But so then when she is cursed and put under the spell, it's her being in the gas chamber, and so her body is sort of dumped in this ditch. But the prince had escaped and comes in the ditch and finds her and resuscitates her, because she's not dead. So he does mouth to mouth and resuscitates her, and that is kind of like the true love's, like the kiss that breaks the spell. Is when the prince guy, who was her friend in the concentration camp, resuscitates her with mouth to mouth in the ditch after she'd been gassed. It sounds super morbid, but the way that they tell it, it's like goes back and forth between her granddaughter in sort of modern times, who's sort of tracking down her story, and her grandmother always talks about being a princess and being under a spell and saved by a prince, and they think she's just sort of like has dementia, but her granddaughter is a journalist and starts tracking down these details of the story, and so it flips back and forth between modern times and then back during the Holocaust, and it's all told in sort of this fairy tale way. It's so cool. Briar Rose is the name, so if you're ever interested, that's a good one. The last ones I'll show you, are the Lunar Chronicles. If you're familiar with these, Melissa Meyer is the author of these, And so these are futuristic fairy tale retellings. They're all set in the same world, but like the first one is Cinder, and she's a Chinese girl, and she has a like a cyborg parts of her body, like 30% of her body is cybernetic, and so her foot is a mechanical. She's a mechanical foot from like below her knee down, and so that's the whole thing with her shoe, like her foot, like the mechanical thing. So they do some cool things with like her leg, her mechanical leg falls off at the ball, and like they have to track her down, and so it's really really neat. Um, Scarlet is Little Red Riding Hood, and Cress is Rapunzel. Rapunzel is German for lettuce, and Cress is a kind of lettuce, so that's where. And instead of being in a tower, she's trapped on a satellite that orbits the Earth. And the woman who is trapped there comes in a shuttle and brings her supplies, and so that's like how they tell that story. Winter is the Snow White retelling, and then Fairest is the story of the Queen that goes along with Winter. So this is a really cool. I love this series, the Lunar Chronicles. It's like a future sci-fi fairy tale retelling series. One more that we'll talk about is maybe a little more controversial, but I mentioned it in class. Twilight. So I have said in semesters past, I always argue it. To me, Twilight fits in the category of sort of animal bridegroom, sort of a la reclaiming the space like Angela Carter, right? Um, so the only difference is instead of him being Edward being transformed into a beast on the outside, he's beautiful on the outside, but he is, according to him, he feels like he's a monster on the inside. He describes himself as a monster and a creature, and he drinks blood, and he's trying to be better, but he's made lots of mistakes, and he's killed lots of people, and so uh, the main character's name is Bella, which is beautiful, right? So I mean, and like Belle in Beauty and the Beast. So Bella is, sort of, the beast. Edward is obsessed with her, and there's, instead of the father sort of giving a contract over so that his daughter will go live with them. Instead, she sort of contracts with the beast and the vampire to protect her father instead. So there's a little bit of a twist there. So she's sort of in charge. She makes her own contract, but they do have they sort of toy with the whole thing of the rules and the contracts. Okay, I'll be with you, but you know, I want to have sex with you. He's like, okay, well, we'll have sex, but we got to get married first, right? So there's all this like agreement, that they have to like be together forever. So she said, okay, I'll marry you, but you have to turn me into a vampire. So they kind of have this arrangement a little bit, just like in Beauty and the Beast, and he's rich and she's not, and so there's all these sort of recognizable elements of the Beauty and the Beast, and she goes willingly, and um, sort of they're meant to be together, and once she's worried at first that he's going to eat her, but then she accepts the fact that he's not, and that it's very much Beauty and the Beast, right? But instead of being a beast on the outside, he's a beast on the inside, and uh, and he's constantly asking her to marry him, and she's constantly like no, which is just like from Beauty and the Beast, where he's constantly asking her to marry him, and she's like no, I don't want to. So I think it's a retelling of Beauty and the Beast, and so since Twilight is a retelling of Beauty and the Beast, and since 50 Shades of Grey is a fan fiction retelling of Twilight, that means therefore that um, 50 Shades of Grey is also a retelling of Beauty and the Beast, maybe even more significantly. The only really missing thing is her father. Like there's no father character that gives Anastasia away to Christian. She is a modern woman and she makes her own contract, right? But they totally have a contract. It's even there's like scenes in there where they are going through the contract of like what the terms of their arrangement are, and he's super duper rich and she's not, so he buys her, he secures her financial stability in order to, come be with him. And so just like Edward, Christian is not a beast on the outside, he's a beast on the inside. And so, the character is, he's a surviving abuse victim, and he has sort of all this like psychological trauma from his abusive childhood. So he's this beast on the inside that is being sort of tamed and reformed by having Anastasia in his life. And um, so he has a room for her, and he's like, you can, and there's, there's certain rules she has to follow, and if she doesn't follow the rules, she gets in trouble. So it's just like Beauty and Beauty and the Beast. So I'm convinced that those stories classify as a animal bridegroom story. Anyway, this video is long enough. We've talked about Angela Carter, sexy stories, sexy versions of Beauty and the Beast, some other examples of books I have where it sort of became this trend after Angela Carter and Robin McKinley, who we'll talk about in class. When they started at the end of the 1970s, it kind of became this thing of updating fairy tales in sort of modern times, updating fairy tales for older readers, including a little bit more adult themes, and having like movies and TV shows that have sort of a grown-up audience in mind, and sort of grown-up mature themes and characters, and a little bit more complicated um, character interactions and plots. So since Carter sort of kicked off that whole genre, I wanted to sort of talk about that. But I'm done talking, I promise. And we've talked about Beauty and the Beast in class. We're going to talk about Robin McKinley's Beauty next week. And until then, if you have any questions or, need more explanation about some of these Angela Carter stories, just let me know. And I will see you guys later. Bye.